What you're seeing on screen are fragments of a Facebook conversation, one unlike any that you've ever had. The back and forth is a negotiation, though the good being bartered over is a shocking one. An infant child. The person asking the question here, that's me. I wasn't prepared for the answer. With the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein front of mind, there's a greater public awareness of child trafficking now than ever before, tied to the concept of visions of a billionaire cabal and an underground network operated by the powerful. Is there any truth to that notion? Almost certainly. But the issue reaches far beyond the world's elite. So I came to the subject from a different angle, with the goal of answering a single question. Could any one of us illegally obtain a child online? When a topic is as broad and far-reaching as this one, it's essential to pick a focus, lest I be immersed in it for the rest of time. I decided that focus should be on a facet that's complex and often overlooked. Black market babies. As most merchants would, we'll begin with sourcing the product. When it comes to doing so, those in the trade seek out a particular factor: vulnerability. However, it's often not the child themselves that determines an opportune target. Welcome to Nairobi, Kenya, a city infamous for what's referred to as baby snatching. A baby snatcher begins their search on the streets, on the lookout for the softest targets: homeless mothers. They are often teenagers, many of whom struggle with substance abuse and who've usually been abandoned by the child's father. Most have either fled or been kicked out by their families, in large part as a result of the country's religious makeup. Its population is around 85% Christian and 10% Islamic, and both faiths, as observed in Kenya, do not tolerate pregnancy out of wedlock. Having sinned so grievously is justification enough for friends and family alike to completely disown them. This concoction of hardships they face makes them ideal prey for someone like Anita here. While baby snatchers are by no means exclusive to the region, it happens to be the place where journalists from BBC Africa Eye expertly covered the subject. As part of their efforts, they managed to track down the real deal. Anita is the perfect tool for the job. She's manipulative, belligerent, and completely heartless. She has her own struggles with addiction and intermittent homelessness, but even so, any attempt at sympathizing with her is a losing battle.
Mtoto wageni ndivyo ulimchukuaje akakubali kufuatana na wewe mpaka sasa yuko na yeye. Hiyo story hebu nipe juu sielewi.
Effectively, what Anita does is steal to order, a practice usually associated with car theft, here applied to human beings. Having a buyer lined up doesn't mean she shies away from being mercenary in her approach, though. There is no honor among thieves, after all. The BBC journalists witnessed this firsthand. They offered to buy the infant you see here for 80,000 Kenyan shillings, or roughly $720. Anita agreed, but insisted the exchange take place the following day. Overnight, the career kidnapper found a higher bidder, so never came to the meeting place. The police officers poised to take her in had to leave empty-handed, and that prior negotiation was the final contact that the documentary team had with Anita. The child was never recovered. In spite of that, some argue that karma did tilt in the right direction as a result of the film. According to locals, after the documentary had aired, the notoriety it brought caused Anita to spiral. Her substance abuse worsened and ultimately proved fatal. But while one kidnapper might be out of the business, the demand for stolen newborns is underserved, so there are others happy to fill the void. Meet Fred Leparan, filmed here on shift as a social worker at Mama Lucy Kibaki Hospital. He's an occasional, opportunistic trafficker who sources his stock on the job. The theft of newborns from neonatal units isn't an especially rare crime the world over, but such a theft is likely to cause complications and draw scrutiny, even for medical staff. So Fred found an effective way to mitigate such risks. He sells the kids who've been abandoned.
Ni mzuri ako na afya.
Jana ndiye aliachwa.
Na aliachwa mwenye kumwacha kwa wapi?
Mwenye alimwacha alipeleka tu kama hospitali kwa na 2 weeks, 2 days. Kamwacha tu hospitali kaenda.
Acha airudi.
Ndio airudi.
Na mna dalili ya kurudi kwake.
Dalili hakuna.
These discarded children aren't a rarity, which isn't surprising given how unwed pregnancies are perceived. So there's a standard protocol in place for such occurrences. By the book, they're meant to be properly documented at the hospital, then placed in government-run orphanages. The problem is that once abandoned by their parents, the medical workers are the only ones who can confirm their existence. It's a power ripe for exploitation should it fall into the wrong hands. Here we see a BBC journalist posing as a buyer once again. The proposed transaction is less simple this time. In order to complete the sale, the buyer must take an active role in the deception. With an agreement reached, our buyer arrives posing as a worker from the orphanage, there to transport the latest batch of forgotten babies. Though Fred is clearly nervous throughout, his position at the hospital seems to afford him enough trust that no one questions this scenario. All the abandoned infants are passed on to the journalist along with the required paperwork. That is, save for the one they bought. They are without documentation. Relinquished from the hospital's care and unknown to the orphanage, the child is invisible to the state, leaving them at the mercy of whoever deemed them worth the cash. Getting a hold of merchandise isn't always so easy, but sellers have no issue with taking extreme measures to provide for their customers. Next, we turn our attention to Nigeria, a nation with a pro-natalist attitude and similarly strict religious leanings. It's another target-rich environment for those looking to profit from the sale of infants, and is where a different abhorrent practice has been competently exposed. It's known as baby farming. In the example we see here, over 20 pregnant girls were rescued after being held in this compound against their will so that their captors could steal and sell their newborns. The victims were lured in by the promise of a safe haven, an enticing prospect for a class so naive and widely ostracized. Such facilities do exist, but they are rare, and by the time you can determine whether or not you've found one, it's too late. As you'd expect, the conditions in these unsanctioned prisons are dire, and its prisoners would have been kept there until giving birth at the very least.
Some tried taking their lives, some tried escaping. Along the line, they got beaten up. So I was among the ones who tried to escape, but there was no way.
In some baby factories, the soon-to-be mothers are strong-armed into signing over their child in writing, paid for their trouble, and then cut loose.
They told me some amount of money that was going to be paid to my account, and I accepted it, and that was how I entered into it.
In others, they're given nothing. And in the worst of them, victims are held like cattle and assaulted by their tormentors in order to produce more product. For this breed of criminal, farming is core to the business model, but for others, it's a side hustle, as Al Jazeera journalists discovered during their investigation into Asia's baby trade. In this undercover video, their team captured evidence of infant sales taking place in a brothel. Further exploiting these women forced into slavery by allowing them to fall pregnant is grim. But, impossibly, an offer from the dealer managed to make things even worse. While I understood that trafficking involves countless deplorable tactics, prior to researching this subject, I wasn't aware of those we just covered, or of the scale of some of these operations. These crimes are as cruel as they are depressing to become aware of, and they feel more so when you learn they probably aren't even necessary to keep this dark market rolling. I say that because there are a surprising number of people looking for a way to shed their unborn sons and daughters. Finding a buyer isn't always a trivial matter though, and that is where baby brokers come in. Now we find ourselves in Malaysia, again in the company of Al Jazeera journalists who connected with several brokers during the course of their investigation. More than one is in the medical field, and like in our earlier example, they use this to their advantage.
So 2.5 is the delivery charge, and the BC charge will be 7. You don't have to be nervous because we do this on like a very regular basis. I think that's how the word of mouth spread that we actually do the BCs.
Their access to certain systems facilitates their crimes, helps them cover their tracks, and when all is said and done, make illegal adoption appear 100% legitimate. When it comes to corruption, it isn't exclusive to these middlemen alone, with anyone from law enforcement to government agencies playing their part.
Surat perjanjian, all pun kena buat juga. Jadi kita orang kata dari hati ke hati kita kena ada penipuan.
Surat perjanjian yang macam mana?
Akan ada surat jaya sumpah, akan ada polis sign jadi saksi.
Kena ada orang yang tolong.
Dia mesti ada
Orang yang tolong.
Mesti ada orang dalam polis. Mudah. Sign, please.
Tu kena bayar dia orang.
So we have one officer, so-called, in each of these JPMs. We've got about 8 under whom we pay. So we will tell you the date, the time, and which JPM to go to. So that shouldn't be it.
When a kid that has been stolen or purchased is legitimized in this way, it's known as child laundering, and some seem to take great pride in their ability to provide this service.
Average delivery of 30 deliveries a week. So we'll just slot you in one of those.
They reject, it's just a rejection. So they will query the hospital actually. We will just pay them off, 1-2K, and then it's done. Do this for more than 2 years. It's my dad. So there's no problem with that actually.
Those who treat baby selling like a business take dehumanization to the next level by allowing customers to personalize their order.
But it's Chinese people expensive. They charge about 30K. 30K for the baby alone. Vietnam is okay, isn't it? They look like Chinese. Sometimes this Indonesian and then boyfriend Chinese. That also I got. They also look like Chinese.
Awful though it may be, this illicit industry is booming. A 2023 report from the International Labour Organization places a $172 billion a year estimate on human trafficking as a whole. While it's hard to say how much of this stems from the sale of infants, it alone is an undeniably lucrative endeavour. To brokers the world over, the pregnant girls who bring them income are mere pawns. And while these girls do often approach a broker by choice, it's crucial to stress that for the majority this comes from a place of desperation. They're young, uneducated, and likely rejected by their families. They're homeless and unable to provide for themselves, let alone a child. Usually the girls will receive a flat fee when the exchange is made, but another feature in many brokers' offers is the coverage of living and medical expenses. They last up until the point of delivery, and personally, I can see how this could feel like the lesser evil, since the alternative is life on the streets, unfed, and without medical care throughout the pregnancy. Having said that, the naive teenagers that malignant merchants exploit are frequently signing an agreement they don't understand. Some are under the impression that they're putting their children in a foster home for a certain number of years. Others are told that they aren't signing over rights at all, but rather granting them permission to attend a free school. Whether misled or not, the appeal of this kind of offer is especially strong for immigrants, who in much of the world will be giving birth to children considered stateless. These foreigners are the least likely to understand their contracts, and those with the fewest options available to them should they later regret their decision.
Ada yang balik sekarang kan orang sudah bagi 10,000, ada bagi 7,000. Tengok mak yang nak baby. Itu sebab benda stop tahun ni, start daripada 2 bulan lepas, benda dah stop warga negara. Benda tak mau ambil warga negara, semua benda urus orang Indonesia sebab lebih beribu benda uruskan orang Indonesia. Tak ada masalah. Sudah diberi anak, dia enggak tahu, dia tak pernah tanya.
That said, it also bears mention that once a contract has been signed, it's usually too late to fight it, whether you're native or not. And it's rare that anyone even tries, since any hint of such a notion is met with threats and intimidation. Now that we've come this far, I'm sure we're in agreement that what we've covered is objectively awful, and every effort should be made to keep these things from happening. With that thought in our heads, I want to remind you that all of these indefensible crimes are in service of a market. So, who's attempting to purchase these kids, and how are they tracking down a seller? The intentions of those interested in stolen babies is an uncomfortable thing to consider. When we hear the words child trafficking, our minds instantly jump to child predators. That's a fair assumption given it's accurate in many high-profile cases, and generally in examples involving slightly older children. While I'm sure predators account for a percentage of black market baby sales, from what I can tell, they aren't the primary market. A few may end up in the hands of so-called begging syndicates, who use children to draw sympathy in order to extract cash from passers-by. To these criminal groups, an infant would be no more than a prop, so they seem to prefer older children who are able to gather income for their owners independently. Child labour and organ harvesting are two other well-known use cases for trafficked kids, but again, newborns aren't the focus. The reality is that the demand for black market babies is driven by those who sincerely want to adopt. There is some nuance when it comes to their reasons. In Kenya, it's mostly local women who can't conceive on their own. While religious influences condemn pregnancy outside of marriage, Kenyan society places a great emphasis on fertility and a woman's capabilities as a childbearer and caregiver. A failure to meet these expectations can lead to being shunned. There are other factors at play, but the crux of it is that infertility can ruin the life of a Kenyan woman. Facing the possibility of a bleak future, some choose to procure one by any means necessary. And since adopting an older child won't provide that illusion of fertility, it must be a newborn. It makes sense that in their culture and circumstances, only a baby will do, but such societal pressures don't apply to many who share that fixation. From what I could gather, it's often just a matter of preference, especially for those in developed countries. I suppose it's understandable that those who desperately want a child would want to adopt one that's as young as possible. By doing so, they'll get the full parental experience. As someone who can vividly recall the moment I learned my Tamagotchi had expired in a pile of its own excrement, I can't relate. But I can sympathize. I get why it could be important to people. The problem is the extreme imbalance this desire has caused. There are millions of children who need homes, but millions of the adults waiting to adopt are hell-bent on competing for the tiny fraction that happen to be fresh from the womb. That means that any particular couple's chance of getting selected for one is slim.
Your profile needs to stand out to expectant moms. The reason why you're not being matched with your agency could be that your profile may need some work. If you can just picture for a second, if you are an expectant mom working with an agency and they're showing you profiles of all of these different families, imagine just seeing the same thing over and over again. It can get really hard to try to choose somebody.
To make matters worse, the process can be arduously slow at the best of times, especially for those who are picky. In some corners of the world, it's sluggish to the point that I'm forced to wonder if it's intentional.
I told the police and I told welfare and I sicked them on them and they went in and they did the raid and
you explained why you had to do it to them?
And I said, you're not taking this baby.
The traffickers escaped arrest. Meanwhile, Hartini was able to adopt Zara. But the legal adoption process has been long, expensive and emotionally draining. After 8 years, she finally became Zara's legal parent, but Zara is still not considered a Malaysian citizen.
We've been running around in circles for 3 years. It took me 5 years to get her birth certificate. It takes me another 3 years to put in, her application for citizenship, and I'm still waiting.
Proper safeguards are essential, of course. But if a 10-year-old can find a suitable family and still age out of the process before it's finished, then there's something wrong. So where do prospective parents turn when they grow disillusioned with the legal route? They hop online, of course. Child trafficking in general has its tendrils spread throughout the internet. Fake modeling agencies, blackmail and coercion through chat groups, catfishing, the list goes on, and not even Roblox is safe. When it comes to the baby trade, though, it's not about luring kids in. It's about marketing one to the right audience. Regarding how this is done, I've witnessed a couple of approaches and heard tell of others. First, there are sketchy adoption agencies. Some will target local and others international clientele, although the viability of the latter hinges on the law and levels of corruption in both countries involved. These agencies can appear convincing on the surface, but there are a few warning signs to look out for. We've established that adoption is slow, so if there's an option to pay to expedite the process, that's a bad sign. Express delivery on your baby suggests that the provider isn't too concerned with where it ends up. Another red flag is a business model that caters to the Build-A-Bear mentality their clients are likely to have. For example, flexible pricing based on factors such as race, eye color, physical health, and so on.
So the lighter skin, if a male, higher price. The darker skin, girl, lower price. And then if you're a mix, higher price.
And finally, while this may seem innocuous, I've noticed a bit of a trend. Shady agencies often want to be contacted via WhatsApp, and should there be other contact info, it'll be utilizing public providers. How legitimate these agencies can make their work appear depends on their connections. If they are competent at forgery and have friends in the right places, it could be indistinguishable from the real thing. Or it could be an obvious fraud at a glance, in which case the client is left to deal with the fallout. It's also rumored that fraudulent adoptions take place on the dark web, because of course. I haven't seen any direct evidence of this, but child trafficking is inseparably linked to the production of CSAM, which itself is forever associated with the dark web. It wouldn't surprise me, but I could find no reporting on the subject, and any attempt to confirm this personally would mean exploring a part of the internet I'm simply not willing to. So, we'll just have to call this one a maybe. One thing we can be certain of, though, is that the primary sales tool in this industry is up on the surface, and that would be social media. It's Facebook that appears to be the platform of choice for baby traders, with its use being especially prevalent in the Philippines. Its impact there has been covered by Rainbot in episode 8 of her series, Stories from Our Disturbing World, so I must insist you go watch that once we're done here. As for us, we'll be taking a broader look at the phenomenon, and we'll start by turning our attention back to one of our brokers. She calls herself Bonda, which means mother in Malay. The Al Jazeera journalist who tracked her down did so through a simple Facebook search, and if her claims are true, being on the social network has paid off in a big way.
Bonda says it costs up to $2,500 to buy a baby, complete with falsified birth documents. It doesn't seem like big money for the baby seller, until she drops a bombshell.
Ada berapa orang?
Sini sekarang ada 78 orang. 78.
78?
Belum yang baby lagi.
78 biomom.
She was able to send the buyer a catalogue of pregnant girls and present several of them in person, so there are few reasons to doubt her. Though we began with baby snatching, Bonda's approach looks to be the standard. Instead of being stolen, the unborn are pre-ordered like a Death Stranding collector's edition that's gone too far. While this broker makes an easy living, it's common for sellers to cut out the middleman. Facebook is host to an ever-changing number of groups aimed at connecting adopters to adoptees. Many are private, with users required to answer a questionnaire before gaining access. Others are public, though your mileage may vary with those. Some of these pages are sincere, well-organized, and act as avenues for those looking for legal private adoptions. Then there are those that appear to be nothing more than chaotic dumping grounds. The best of them tend to attract real couples who've become disillusioned with the standard process. These were usually based in the US, where millions are waiting to adopt a newborn. That so many of these desperate couples exist creates an opportunity for a different breed of criminal. I am, of course, talking about scammers. When discussing brokers, we went through their standard offer to cover care and living expenses. The setup is broadly similar when it's made without a middleman, but those determined to adopt are prone to putting the blinders on. To take advantage of that, all that's required is a touch of roleplay. In the black and grey baby markets, many refer to pregnant girls as carriers, and some con artists go above and beyond to present themselves as just that. Unfortunate marks have been duped by sub-stories, forged paperwork, and even stolen scans. It's also vital to look the part, as you'd imagine, but if you're ever in this much of a rush, then you clearly didn't prepare as well as you should have. These crooks are known to ask for increasing cash amounts throughout their feigned pregnancy, whether for the basics or sudden emergencies. They may need you to cover rent, or they might just live in your house, until one day they suddenly vanish. Fakery isn't just for the ladies either, as our very real friend Willie here will tell you. I stumbled across him attempting to find someone willing to take 2 little girls off his hands. He's from Manchester, England, and currently lives in a part of Africa seldom heard of. That may sound unlikely, but fear not. The banner on his profile is a complete, unredacted image of his Wisconsin license. While I'll censor this poor gentleman's private information, I need you to know that even with the license, they managed to get his name wrong. Why some freak would make a fake profile and pretend to be involved in all this, I have no idea. But here's what happened when I did it. As established a little while ago, these adoption groups are often locked and require extra steps to get in. I did gain access to a handful of them, but their members appeared to be genuine. Most of them just seemed to be quite sad about all the scams they'd fallen for, and I got the impression that the extra security was an attempt to keep those scammers out. Having said that, it's fair to assume that criminal groups were way less likely to let me in, and there have been many other known examples, so that I didn't happen to find one doesn't tell us much. Setting the private groups aside, there are a plethora of small public pages who claim to share the same purpose. And it was one of those that led to my most unsettling interaction. Here's a quick Patreon interruption. I have one of those. You can see the tears on screen, and I can feel the tears running down my face since I have so few patrons. How dare you, you monsters. Doing all the normal YouTube stuff really helps. Like, subscribe, comment. Don't forget to watch Rain's story video, and my previous video was about YouTube animal cruelty, and I would love your help to get more of it removed. So you can watch that video if you want, but I'll also put like a link in the comments or whatever, the pinned comment. Okay, bye. Now I need to be careful what I say from here on. Given the sensitive subject matter, I'd rather err on the side of caution. As such, certain details will be omitted and only snippets of the upcoming conversation will be shared. For that same reason, I won't refer to the adoption page by name, but for context, I will say that it specified a focus on wealthy Western countries. It seemed unmoderated, most of the posts were in broken English, and anonymous contributions were allowed. Scattered throughout the noise, I happened upon a number of posts from a named account whose activity was all geared towards one goal: finding someone to take ownership of a baby boy. Above the images of the child, there was some no-nonsense text. I checked their profile and found it was barren. Just an image of a man in a face mask and a single shared video. Whether this picture was truly a reflection of the person behind the account, I wasn't sure, but I wasn't counting on it. Jumping back to the posts, I found that several sketchy characters had expressed an interest. Those who got a response from the masked man were told to send a DM. Since I'm prone to bad decisions, I decided to do so uninvited. I wasn't sure how to begin, so I went for a no-nonsense tone myself. They claimed to be from a country in North Africa, while I told them I was from the USA. They tried flattery, but I am actually British and therefore immune. When asked about logistics, the man told me he could deliver the child personally, were I able to provide him a work visa and an employment contract. So, I asked him, "What do you want for the baby?" "I want him to have a better life and to meet me when he grows up so I can tell him the story. He will be your son for life, but let him know about me. So all you want is the work visa." I can't imagine a story any son would want to hear less than the tale of their own abandonment from the guy responsible. That struck me as rather disingenuous. To be honest, this was already further than I'd expected the conversation to go, because my other attempts had led to no response at all. I occasionally revisited the conversation over the next few days, under the impression that this was probably an attempt to extract money from me, but also with the thought in mind that there was the slimmest chance that they were telling the truth. The further the conversation went, the less convincing either option seemed. Okay, so the visa isn't a means to an end, it's the end in itself, right? Well, that may not be the case. Allow me to explain. My understanding was that to legally work in the US, you needed to bring something that's in short supply. Until recently, I'd taken that to mean highly skilled work, but that's not always the case, especially in certain sectors. As I was being asked to pull government documents and employment out of thin air, it seemed like he was unaware of how immigration processes work. So I spoke as if it was something I could do in order to learn more. Since I'm supposed to find him employment, I'd need to know what he's capable of. I asked the suspected baby trader if he had any relevant qualifications, or better yet, a resume I could take a look at. He said he'd have to find his resume, but claimed to have an unspecified qualification that just so happens to be covered under the USA's most frequently exploited work visa. The H-2A is comparatively easy to get, has a quick turnaround, and those who receive it usually aren't closely monitored. They aren't known to be used in illegal adoptions, but their utility in exploiting labor is well documented. Many recipients have fallen prey to traffickers who guide them through the process and send them to an employer. This employer then strands them by stealing their passports, after which they're treated like slaves. It's also not unheard of for H-2A recipients to be traffickers themselves, who act as recruiters for malicious actors in the United States. An important detail for our discussion is that someone with this visa can have their family members accompany them by way of a separate visa, the H-4. Who's a family member is determined by the country of origin, so in practice, all it takes to launder a child is forged paperwork declaring them family on one side and a crooked farmer on the other. Though I've been unable to find reports of child trafficking via this route, that doesn't mean it can't be done, or that it isn't happening as we speak. Once I was aware of the flaws in the system, it became clear that the masked man wasn't as clueless as he'd seemed. While I couldn't fulfill their request myself, were I someone desperate for a baby, then I could seek out someone able to do so for a price. From here, the alarm bells continued. Though the stranger claimed he wanted to handle the adoption legally, he was adamant that a lawyer should only become involved following his arrival. A solid indication that they weren't planning to hand the kid over officially, if at all. The guy in the mask also told me that we'd meet at the airport, and that he'd have to live in my house until he could find a place to stay. I suspect this was an attempt at indirect reassurance, the idea being that if he wasn't going to hold up his end of the bargain, then why would he suggest such a thing? In any case, since the house doesn't exist, I told him I was fine with it. Up until that point, I'd deliberately chosen not to mention the mother, but now I wanted to know what excuse he'd have for her absence. The man fed me a story indicating that, were she to keep the child, she'd become the victim of an honor killing. As such, she'd given full rights to him. It's a story that introduces peril and begets empathy, precisely the type of scenario that would make bringing the boy to America seem virtuous. After a lull in the discussion, I returned with the hope I could ascertain that no child was at risk. At first, I tried to find other copies of the images of his supposed son. I'd have been relieved to find they were stolen from elsewhere, but I turned up nothing. So I feigned interest again, but before negotiations could resume, I wanted evidence that he still had the boy. He sent me this. Is the video conclusive? No. It could be an old video, or maybe the kid belonged to someone he knew and he'd used their private material. Maybe it was all true. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Regardless, seeing it filled me with dread. And that dread deepened with my next discovery. On the lookout for any of his other interactions, I found that he was a member of another Facebook group. There were only a handful of other members, all of whom wrote in Arabic, and its banner was an image of a crying baby. The name, a supposed dog whistle, one that tells those in the know that here we rehome children, those who are lost and forgotten. The man in the mask claimed to have a child he was ready to give away. He hadn't offered the boy up to the second group, and he'd find no Western visa among its small gathering of Eastern members. So, why was he there? After a few hours of frantic searching, I decided to gather everything I had and report it to any authority who would listen, both in his country and abroad. It's distressingly difficult to find anyone who will listen. I went into this project wondering if any one of us could buy a child online, and the answer seems to be yes. In certain places, it's shockingly easy to do so. In others, even the well-meaning can struggle to adopt. But if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that if you're so desperate to adopt that you're willing to rely on a trafficker, then whether willfully or unwittingly, you might just become one.
gelukkig.